Okay, I think that's about enough waiting. We can kick into things. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for jumping on in your evening. We've got a super exciting hour lined up. We've got a few things to get through. We're going to kick off with just a very brief introduction of myself, so you know who this Kiwi on the screen is in front of you, and then we'll work through a couple more things before we jump into a discussion with Travis. My name's Theo. I'm in the business development team here at Halter. I was very fortunate. I joined Halter back in the early days, back when it was first starting, just when we had a few farms live. I grew up in a sheep and beef background in the bottom of the North Island of New Zealand. Always had a really strong passion for the beef space. When I joined Halter, like I said, it was early on. And we had a great idea and some really cool visions and some great people, and been very fortunate enough to be on the journey with them. And my job now is to help do our launch into the United States, which I'm really excited to do and super proud. So I'm spending a lot of time over here. I'm currently calling in from Missouri in Kansas City. So that's where I fit in. I wanted to give you all just a very brief agenda. So I'm just going to talk a little bit through the history of Halter, where we've come from, what our mission is, why we're actually trying to do what we're doing, and then just a quick sort of summary on where we're at in the US at the moment. And then we're going to jump in to Travis and I. Halter was founded in 2016 in New Zealand. Our CEO and founder is a bloke named Craig Piggott. He grew up on a small pasture-based dairy system in the Waikato, which is a central region of the North Island of New Zealand. Essentially just a kid who grew up on a farm, and he spent a lot of time sitting behind cows and a lot of time putting up hot wires. New Zealand, we know all about putting up hot wires. And then he left the farm. He went and studied engineering. He worked for a company called Rocket Lab, which is sort of like New Zealand's equivalent of SpaceX. And essentially was just home tinkering in the weekends with this crazy idea of, could we make cows walk themselves to the shed, and could we contain cows through virtual fencing? Eventually, he got to a point where he had a concept. He pitched the idea to his boss at the time, and that unlocked our first round of funding. And it was really early days. It was classic, design in a tin shed on the back of a farm. Fast forward since then, we had 4 years of very heavy research and development, trying to make this essentially Uber and Fitbit live on a cow 24/7. We've been fortunate enough to go through some pretty major funding rounds. A lot of our funding has actually come out of the US. We have a really strong tie there. And it's always just sort of meant we have a strong alignment with the US, and we're really excited to move into the US. So that's where we're at now. The US itself, we've got ranches live in a bunch of different states now. Our first ranch went live earlier this year. We're really excited to be hiring a team over here. We're going to continue to launch ranches right across the US as the year progresses, and into next year as well. And then it's probably worth touching on what is our mission. And our mission is this. It is, we believe in a world where pasture-based ranches are more productive, profitable, and sustainable. And those three words are really important to us, because often what we find is, to be able to do one of those things, sometimes manageable, but usually it comes at the compromise of the other. So when half the world's land mass is agriculture, and about 3/4 of that land mass is grazing grasslands, there's a massive role that pasture-based systems play in our overall global food system, and we want to make that more efficient and sustainable and more profitable. And we believe one of the best ways to do that is through the grass that you have, and how we manage it. So that's our mission. We're really excited to bring this out of New Zealand and Australia into the US, and see where it can fit into ranches over here. Actually, we might not go to this image just quite yet, because that would take away from Travis. Travis, I'm going to throw over to you now, mate. It'd be great just to give a bit of an introduction on yourself, your background, and the ranch would be fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm I'm Travis Mulliniks. I'm a cow-calf nutritionist located at the university, or Oregon State University. So I've been, even though I'm a cow-calf nutritionist, the last few years we've been looking more and more with technology and using technology in the cow-calf space. And for a long time, when you look at where Halter has been on the dairy side, it's been a missing hole for a lot of our producers is technology that can help them. When you think about how technology has really increased production for a lot of producers in the dairy side, the crop side. And so for the last few years, we've been doing a lot of research with technology. And I guess I've been met with Halter a couple years ago, and really excited about what they can bring to the table and some of their product and them as a team. And so so I'm just a professor at Oregon State. We have a cow herd here on the western end of the state that we've got roughly 80 collars on cows right now, in a situation that we're moving cows every day or twice a day in some instances. And so we've had collars on since May. And since May, we really haven't touched cows. And that's been one of the most fascinating things. And it was one of the things I didn't necessarily believe was that effective when Theo and the team was telling me about how they ship cows, until I went to New Zealand and saw it. And so highly effective of rotating cows through small pastures, very accurate in that terms, and being able to graze less than 10-acre pastures very effectively. And so we're excited to be part of the team and work with Halter on this.
Yeah, and we're certainly lucky to have you on board, Travis. I've got another question for you before we're going to jump to an image that you may have briefly seen before that shows the collar. We can talk a little bit about how it works and how it's actually working with the cow and some of the key parts of the collar. But Travis, you're extremely passionate about the cow-calf space in the US and ag in general. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that cow-calf producers are facing in the US at the moment?
Yeah, cost of production is increasing. Labor costs, feed costs, grazing costs, all that's increasing for producers. And so 65% of my total cow cost is wrapped up in nutrition, and that's part of grazing. And so, we've got to focus on how to be better grazers and utilize our land mass, which is not growing, better. And part of that, this technology allows you to have eyes that we can't have eyes, and allows you to, whether or not it's the distribution issue in large landscapes, or if it's controlling some rotational grazing and controlling cost of, cross fencing cost me 20,000 per mile. And so, going to more rotational grazing, more intensive grazing. So there's a lot of opportunity on the cost side that producers can capture using technology. Some of the other deals is, if you think about reproduction has not changed in 30 years in the United States. Calf weaning weights haven't changed in the United States in the last 30 years. And so a lot of our output traits haven't changed. And so what can we embrace that can help either increase some output or decrease that cost? And so that's a big one. Some of the other aspects is what the data can provide you in making decisions, right? So you think about technology and some of these wearable technologies is that they can provide you data that can enhance your ability to make better decisions, basically. And think about landscapes that we have cows at, and some large, grazing and cow per, maybe 10 cows per section scenarios, or down to 2 cows per acre. That's a large difference in decision making. But in some of these larger landscapes, we can't capture the data like the dairy industry can capture data into making decisions. And I think that's where some of these technologies can really help fine tune our management.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's some really good points you've raised that are facing ranchers, and not just in the US as well. It's a challenge that we're all facing, across different countries, and we all need to look at what options are out there and support each other and figuring out, what the next 10 years is going to look like. I'm seeing a few questions coming through now. Rest assured, we are going to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Hopefully, we can answer a bunch of them as we go through this conversation. But keep sending them in. We will get to them. We'll leave ourselves a good 10 or 20 minutes so we can get through them all. So yeah, we will definitely circle that. Now, the image that you're all seeing now, or hopefully should be seeing now, is one of our beef cows in New Zealand with a halter collar on. The first thing you're probably thinking looking at the collar is the solar panels, and it's really the core part of our product. New Zealand, we don't get a whole lot of sunlight. We can graze very intensively in a lot of our systems. Solar was absolutely where we need to be. The collars need to go on, and then they don't ever need to come off. Battery is not something that we ever need to worry about, and that's what the solar provides. Solar also enables the collars to be updatable, so we can actually update this collar live in the field if we change the software, add a feature, fix some bugs, whatever needs be. We can do that remotely. So really what it's enabled us is to grow and adapt very quickly off a lot of feedback. And believe me, over the last 4 years, we've certainly got a lot of feedback. And we like feedback because it actually means we can make changes and continue to innovate and build what you guys as producers and ranchers need. I just want to really quickly run through how this collar is interacting with the cows. And Travis, if you've got anything to add on this, based off your experience so far, feel free to jump in as well, because you're going to see some images in a little bit of cows behind a virtual fence. So I want to make sure we actually are all understanding how the collar is actually interacting with this cow. So essentially, this cow that you can see on this image, if she was walking up to a virtual fence with halter, what she's hearing is beeps. Audible beeps that increase in volume and frequency as she's right beside this fence. So essentially she's hearing the fence as opposed to seeing it. Okay, and that's a really important concept to keep in mind. And then we have directional guidance for the cows. We beep them in the right ear to turn them left, the left ear to turn them right, and we can do that on an individual basis. And then our other really important cue is our vibration. The vibration is a cue that a cow associates with moving forwards. So for example, you've got a 1,000-acre block, you want to split it into tenths, you have the cattle in one section of it, and you would schedule them to shift into their next section. When that timer went off, in the background, it's just controlled off an app on your phone, the cows will get individually a series of sound and vibration to let them know there's a new break available, and it will guide them into that new break. We also have an electric pulse in there to reinforce the cues when required, mostly during training. However, it doesn't work that cow, if you imagine she hits the virtual fence, that she gets that negative cue from the collar. That will be a hard line, and we're always fighting cows, and we don't want to fight cows. What happens is that cow's allowed to step over the fence, just over. The collar will beep her in the left or right ear, continuously warning her that she's over the mark. We'll try to guide her back into break. If she's over for too long, that's when she'll get a pulse to say, right, hurry up, move back over. And what's been a really exciting development for us is that, particularly in the last 12 months, we've been able to individualize this to each cow's behavior. For example, a heifer gets bumped out by an older cow. Her grace period is a lot longer, okay? And the energy of her pulse is a lot lower. One of your fence jumpers goes out, her grace period is shorter. So we actually adapt to each cow's individual behavior. And I guess the overall concept is, if you are going to be using virtual fencing and put in one of these collars on a cow, the most important thing is that it's really predictable for her. She has to understand exactly what the collar is trying to tell her, okay? And we need a really high level of precision so that that's really consistent. If it's consistent and she can really understand what's going on, she can trust it. And once they trust it, we can use it really effectively and in a really quite amazing manner. And that's something that we've always had a really strong focus on. So high level, that's how the collar's working. Travis, do you have anything to add to that from your end?
For guys that have used other companies, think of this as a positive reinforcement training, right? And so I don't think our cows were shocked too many times in the training period or after the training period. And so, think from an animal welfare aspect of the shock is a last resort. And so it's really a positive reinforcement of, and that's why it works so well is, and it's interesting watching the training period of them learning that is a really cool process.
Thanks, Travis. And it probably will tie into a question I've got for you in a minute. But I think I'm quite curious, and you sort of alluded to it in your first point. But what what first got your interest in virtual fencing? This obviously isn't just a brand new thing for you in the last few months. This has been quite a long journey for you so far. So talk us through that. How did that begin, and what does that look like, sort of in the last few years?
Yeah, I think I stepped back a little bit when Dean Anderson at the USDA and ARS in Las Cruces, New Mexico, when he was doing this work. I was a grad student, and it was some of the craziest stuff when he would talk about it. And you thought it was way out there. This would never be adopted. Um, but I think the interest came, 3 or 4 years ago. Virtual fence got really popular, really hot, and there was a lot of popular press, a lot of push. So from an extension standpoint, your universities really need to get ahead of where a popular press was pushing of and figure out where this will work and where it doesn't work. And so that's where we kind of got interested in it. And at the time, we were working with Vince when I was at Nebraska in the earlier days, and that's when Halter reached out and wanted information about beef production in the United States and looking at coming over here, etc. And I didn't get really interested until I went to New Zealand and spent a week down there with Theo and Helen and those guys. And it was watching it work and how effectively it was working in a dairy system. We saw some beef systems, and so how effective it was working on their end is when I got interested in it. And so to me, it was like really a big game changer in how we can manage from the effectiveness of those collars.
And it probably then begs the question, and you've alluded to some parts of it, and it was certainly a pleasure to host you in New Zealand, and we really like it when people come visit and see us on our home turf and see where we've come from. That history to us is really important. And something we really love to share with others. I'm keen to understand though, Travis, why Halter in the end? What really stuck out for you from like a product side of things in terms of what you were wanting to achieve and what you thought the industry needed to achieve?
Yeah, so there's a lot of cool products out in the industry, and a lot of times what a company says they will do is not always what that product will do. One thing that stuck with me with Halter was the integrity of what they said the product will do and what they say it will not do, and so they've always been honest about their product. Um, a lot of in Halter, or Theo can go into this, a lot of in-house Q&A of just quality control of making sure their product is working and it should be working, and not just turning it loose and having a large failure and trying to go back and see why we failed. And so yeah, a lot of just how Halter, developed their process, and a lot of, I've been impatient waiting for them to get into the United States, and Theo can attest to that of the emails he's gotten from me. But it was, in a way, that's their process of making sure they're not rolling something out that's not going to work, and they really are careful with their product and making sure it works how they want it to work before they move on. And so just from that integrity of a company, aside from the fact that we could shift and move cows without any labor, aside from the fact and that you have the ability to look at like estrus detection, calving events, health status, etc., that can be added to the platform. All those are big additives that can really help. And so they've moved forward that this is not just a virtual fence. And there's a lot other things that you can couple with this that can really have a big benefit to your operation.
Yeah, and it's kind of you to mention, Travis, and I think something that I'd love to see in some of the questions. We are new in the US. There's about a 250,000 cattle using our system in New Zealand, Australia. We've been doing it for a long time. We're really fortunate in our part of the world. It hasn't been without its challenges. There's a long list, and we're proud of them because we've worked through them and we've factored that into our product because we can adapt it really quickly. But what I'd love to see in some of these questions that come up for Travis and I is, we know that US systems are different. It's part of our process as we enter the US, is to work with really good ranchers, take on as much feedback as possible. We're not trying to say we'll be perfect. There'll definitely be some learnings, but I guess our commitment to the US and the industry over here is that we will work incredibly hard alongside you to build what you want, to work through any challenges alongside you, and yeah, we don't shy away from that. We back the product 100%, but you can always be better. Um, and that's going to be a really key focus for us. Travis, I suppose at your end, mate, it would be quite interesting to understand, because I'm sure there's quite a few people on the call wondering, what did your collaring and training process look like? Training is a big part of things that we do, so I'm
Yeah.
keen to understand your experience, good, bad, and ugly, all the learnings.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think Halter's big on helping you through that process and making sure it's more of a team effort, that you understand the process and you understand the training, because that's going to be the outcome of how good your training was. So we fell in an instance that the Halter team had to go back to New Zealand in the process because of some of our politics, I guess, of how we can get stuff done. But it took us a little delay getting collars on. But collaring was simple. We collared 80 head in less than an hour one day. And then when we started training, they have a very good outline of how you should train cows. And it's a 10-day, I think it's 10-day process, Theo. And so for the first 7 days, basically, we're using a hot wire and would move off the hot wire every day farther and farther away from where our virtual fence would have been. And so what was cool about it is every day of us going to move that hot wire, then virtually move those cows over, those cows would take off running and they would beat us to the line of the virtual fence and stand there and wait. And as soon as we moved the hot wire, then opened up to the next shift or next break, those cows would start moving into there. And so it was probably the most effective training process that I've ever been around, of how quickly they learn the process, and then how effective it was after that. And so after that 7 days, we took the hot wire off, and then it was 3 days of shifting them first with the collar. And so that's a little slower process. And I think some days took 2 hours for those cows to actually shift over, the collar telling them to move. But it's now where it's probably less than 30 minutes of getting cows shifted over to a new section. And so it's really a smooth training period that, like I said earlier, I don't think we've had very many cows actually get shocked. I think it's that positive reinforcement. Those cows were excited to move into the next section. And we did this with cow-calf pairs. And so those cows actually would get out and graze ahead of the cows in the shift. And that never caused those cows to break and get into the next. And so, which we can talk about later. I think there's benefits to that, but it's been a very effective training, and not having any issues of either the cows breaking or those calves making those cows break into the next shift early.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, and certainly I think collaring is collaring is a day. It takes a bit of time for everyone's interest.
Yeah.
We typically collar in a head crush, one by one. We've really tried to make that process as smooth as possible.
Yep.
But you're still putting a collar around a cow's neck, and she's not used to that. So it's part of the process. Something that everyone might be a little bit interested in with our training is something we really found that was key in our part of the world was, when we went from our first 5 farms, producers, to our first 100. Every single one was a little bit different. And what we really learned out of that is we actually have to tailor the training plan sometimes to each individual producer. So we've got a rough sort of guideline, but then our team will actually look at it in the context of your own property, the way you do things, whether you use hot wires, how you shift your cattle,
Yeah.
and adapt that program with you. We're not big believers in one size fits all when it comes to ranching, because every ranch, even if they look the same, you can guarantee they don't run exactly the same. Travis, I suppose, and you know some of our other Halter ranches, and obviously with your own operation in Oregon as well. I suppose on your guys' operation, what are the three? If you were to try and list it out, what are the three main objectives that you're hoping to achieve with virtual fencing? Maybe there's some that like a 6-month journey, and then there's some that like a 2-year journey. And maybe you could break it out for us. What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I think a big one for us is, on this side of the state of Oregon, we've got a lot of grass growth, especially early on. And so tremendous amount of grazing potential. We also have high costs of cross fencing. And so one of my aspects, what we want to do is more intensive grazing. And so that's a challenge with some products out there of the accuracy to intensive graze, especially smaller pastures, less than some companies, less than 100 acres. And so, being in 5-10 acre pastures or less is, can we effectively graze and do this, using some of these technologies to really increase our grazing days and utilize those pastures better, capture some regrowth if we get some midsummer rains, etc. So that's a big one, is increase our grazing capacity. The other one is the cost aspect. Is fencing is expensive. And the third is labor. And I talked about, we haven't really touched these cows since May. And so we're shifting those every day. And so we don't have that labor aspect of going out there and moving cows. We're still checking cows, etc. But we do somewhat get that data. If a cow's not moving, we still get a notification, right? If you think something's going on, etc. And so those aspects is what we're looking at, is, can I increase my grazing days? Can I decrease my labor costs and decrease just my overall operation costs by being able to really control and be targeted in my grazing strategy?
And I guess, with your grazing strategy, Travis, and the image that everyone can see on screen right now is it's essentially an overlay of one of our producers in New Zealand on hill country. And you can see, looking at that, there's multiple different groups of cattle within a paddock, and you can see the representation of the physical fence, and then you can see the representation of the virtual fence. And I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, Travis. And I just want everyone on the call to picture your own operation, or someone you know's operation. If you had all the money in the world and you could cross fence as much as you want, you didn't have to worry about cost or maintenance or the time it would take to go and shift those cattle, how would that influence your grazing decisions? And what would you do with it? And just looking at this image, that's a really interesting process to go through and think about for your own operation. And Travis, how have you found it? You've now got this tool that means you can graze in a totally different fashion. Has it
Yeah.
been a little bit overwhelming, thinking about how you can implement that into your system, and what changes you're actually going to make?
It can be, it's because you got so many options that you can do. And so, unlike New Zealand, that you talk about kgs and calories of grazing uplands versus lowlands, we're on the B side, we know we don't get that technical of AM, PM grazing strategies. And so, but it does get very challenging in thinking through the process of where I need to graze and where I shouldn't graze. But it does allow you the opportunity of the same thing, right? So sometimes those challenges is that opportunity. So we deal with some toxic weeds of tansy, etc. And this has allowed us to graze around those areas and pastures that we don't want cows in, because that tansy is the only thing that's green right now. And so it's allowed that ability to be much more flexible, but it can propose a challenge of thinking about, how do I lay out my pastures? And so so that does take some time to think about, especially if you have multiple water sources or around water source, of how do you lay that pasture out to being very effective. And so it does take a little more planning from that aspect of, how do I want to graze this going forward, especially when you have some pastures that are not very straightforward.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a really interesting point. You can tell cattle exactly where you want them to go, but you can also, on the flip side, tell them where you don't want them to be. So no, there's some interesting use cases around
But
that.
another aspect to that is I think it makes you a better grazer. And I told our ranch manager when we started this is that, at the end of this, you will become a better grazer because it forces you to think differently in some of these scenarios of how do you utilize your landscape better than what you were before or could afford before. And so it does, I think you do turn out to be a little better of a grazer because of some of the data that you get of how they're utilizing those pastures, but the ability to change that on the fly and change that aspect. If you don't like it, you can easily change it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's interesting, Travis, something that's often a concern in New Zealand, particularly in the beef space, is does this mean we're going to lose that connection with our stock, that stockmanship, and that connection to our land? Um, I know what my answer is, and that's typically that you still spend a lot of time out with your cows.
Yeah.
You can just make an immediate snap management change on your phone to change that. How have you worked through that with the staff on the ranch in terms of spending that time? And how do you feel about that question? I'm sure some people have mentioned it to you. It's a fairly common one. How have you
Yeah.
gone about answering it?
I think some aspects of it is it frees up labor, right? And so you don't have to spend so much time and labor of, moving cows, checking on cows. So it eases that from the aspect of, where your cows are, so you can go directly to them. You know where your grazing distribution is by your heat map, and you can check those areas. And so it does decrease some of those times that you're not spending searching, looking. And so from that aspect, it's been great is that, we can look at a heat map and how we drew it out and say we need to graze this differently moving forward because how that utilization wasn't how we thought it was. Um, and so, but Mike, our ranch manager, has picked it up really quick. And so I hardly seldom look at the app anymore to check what he's doing because he's picked it up that fast that I don't feel like there's a need for myself to even look at what his next plan is. And so it's a there's some challenges of learning how to graze it, utilize your landscapes better, but it's a quick learning curve.
And I think that's an interesting point. And I've had the question a lot over here. For context, everybody, within the app on your phone, you see every cow as its own dot live 24/7. And we're pulling that GPS location off every few minutes. So it's a real live sort of visualization of the property and exactly where your stock are. Um, Travis, have you found, obviously you're not on the ranch every day, mate, you've got lectures to do and you're away at conferences and guest lectures and a whole host of other hats that you wear. What does it felt like being on the East Coast, for example, and pulling out your phone and being able to see the cows live on the ranch?
When I've always talked about ranch of the future, I'm always talking about how can a manager manage from their desk? Getting the data that you need to make decisions from your desk versus either guessing what it is or taking time to get that data. And so it's a very nice, I can just pull up my app anytime and you know, look at where the cows are, look how they're grazing those pastures. We can make that change really quick of we don't like the look of this or they're spending so much of their time and we can change it automatically, but the ability to do that from anywhere and use the app on my phone, which is a really robust system and really easy system to utilize, that it takes a lot of headache, you think, of technology out of the way. And so it's a very simple technology to learn and simple to use that you can utilize from anywhere.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it's certainly an interesting process to watch our producers going through with the app, and then suddenly, you might be able to actually go on vacation with your family and see what's going on. It's a really interesting change. Um, we're going to dive into questions in about 5 minutes time, team. So keep sending them through. I can see a bunch already, and we are going to work through them, and we can just see what comes of that. I'm keen to understand, Travis. there's a lot of conversation about virtual fencing out in the market at the moment,
Mhm.
across a variety of states. There's a bunch of companies, including us. You know, for ranchers that you're speaking to, within Oregon or outside, what advice would you give them if they were looking at virtual fencing for their own operation? How would you go about having that conversation?
Yeah. So, anytime a new technology comes out, it's good to be a first adopter of getting on early, but it's also a bad thing if you get on too early. And so I warn producers of, making sure, because there's no silver bullet for anything. And just because one technology worked for a neighbor doesn't mean it works for you. But make sure that company fits your needs and has the capacity to help you. Because one thing that we're seeing is a lot of early adopters that jump in too early, and they invest heavily into one technology and learn it does not work the way they said it was going to work, or it doesn't work how we want it to work. They've got that large investment and it's hard for them to move off of it at that point. And so my recommendation is know the products out there, know where that product is having you're going, and making sure the product that you're choosing fits your needs. And from a aspect of the company is, do they have the customer service, do they have X, Y, and Z that will really help you when you have issues with technology, because technology fails, and it always does, right? And so it's those aspects that really make it either a good technology or bad when you don't have that help, when it doesn't work the way you thought it was going to work, or there was some kind of failure.
I think that's a really wise point, and this bit of technology isn't a minor bit of tech. It can be quite a significant change to your operation,
Right.
and not a decision to be taken lightly by any means. Our advice certainly to producers, is if you are looking at technology like this, take the time to figure out your goals, what you're
Hmm.
trying to achieve, sit down, really brainstorm it, find out all the information you can, and figure out whether it's the right fit for your operation. Obviously, we can get some great information from others and case studies and what we see, but we've really got to apply it to each individual operation and how it's going to work. Um,
Yeah. So
there's
so
quite a few. Sorry, you go, Travis.
so Theo, but based off of that, I do have one question that comes up.
Hmm.
Think about Halter is coming into the United States,
Yep.
and we see technology fail. And I've worked with a lot of companies in the United States that their products failed, and it was tough dealing with when that product didn't work right. And and so you want to blame it on technology, don't want to use technology, etc. So as Halter, and I can tell you how we've processed this as working with Halter since May, and you guys being in New Zealand is, but what do you tell producers the goal of Halter as they're moving in and investing in, in Halter here in the United States?
It's a very good question. We do a few things for us. Producers only committed to us for 2 years, so customer service and that support once collars are actually on the ranch is absolutely paramount to everything we do. It's really ingrained within the business. So there's one part of it there, and then there's this continuous commitment and investment to always improving the product. So there's about 160, 170 people in New Zealand at Halter. A vast majority of those are actually engineers and data scientists. So the people who are continuously looking at this collar, receiving that feedback, which we want in droves, and continuously trying to work on this product improvement. So we're never going to slow down in that space. We will always look to where we can improve on. And as you said, Travis, nothing's ever perfect. In terms of a New Zealand company entering the US, it's difficult, right? New Zealand's a long way away. It's a different environment. It's a much smaller, compressed landmass. Sure, we got a lot of cattle, but it's still a much smaller area. Different culture. There's a lot of aspects to consider. One of the big commitments we've made is to actually hiring and setting up a really well-established US-based team spread on a bunch of states throughout the US. So we've had a bunch of internal hires move over, to make sure we're bringing a really high level of experience with the product. And then we're going to be hiring a really quite substantial US based team. So that'll be a combination of support, a combination of sales, a combination of customer success. So people who actually look after the ranches once they're live and keep coming up the driveway, every quarter to see how things are going and actually having a conversation and a cup of tea. So yeah, we really want to leverage off. You guys know your systems. We're just learning. We want to work with really great people, and we think that hiring a US-based team, working with really good people in the US, is going to be absolutely key to supporting our ranchers over here. And we've got to earn that trust, and we're set. We've got to earn it, and we're really going to put a conscious effort into making sure we can achieve it as well as we can. Does that answer your question, Travis? I'm sure we'll have a few questions on it. But
Yeah,
is there
yeah.
anything else that's top of mind for you?
Even when you guys were solely based in New Zealand, we would get daily check-ins. Into the app, if we had issues or we had a question, to the app we could send a message and get a response within a few hours, even with the time change difference. And so it hasn't felt like we bought a product and you guys have forgot about us. And so that's been the nice part about it, is that you do have that, I don't know what you call them now, business manager, or that works with you on your product, checks in with you, make sure everything's working. As today I've gotten 3 texts from our person, and so setting up visits, coming out, checking on how things are going. So it doesn't feel like it feels more of a partnership versus we bought a product.
And I'm glad to hear it. And it's certainly, that's how we want all of our ranchers to feel, particularly at this early stage. We need to learn off. We need to learn off everyone. I've just flipped to an image that you can all see. A lot of people often ask how precise Halter is. That graze line hopefully shows that. We're talking inches, and it hopefully gives a bit of perspective on how tight you can graze cattle if you want to. Grazing like this, strip grazing, cover crop, in New Zealand, Australia is a very common practice, and that's absolutely what we've built the collar to do. Travis, we're going to jump into questions now, but thank you for answering all of my questions and throwing some back. To everyone listening, I'm just going to start reading out a bunch of these questions. They're either me questions or Travis, so I'll read them out so you can all hear, and hopefully we can get through a few of them. First question is an easy one and quite a common one to get, which is, what is the weight of the collar? Thanks, Gord. Weight of the collar is about 3 pounds, and that includes the counterweight down below. Really comfortable small collar is just key for us, nice and snug, so it's not going to get snagged on anything. The last thing we want is it to ever fall off. Is really key. Travis, I got one for you here, mate. How large are your pastures and how many animals are you running? You've answered one of those questions, but how large are your pastures?
Yeah, so some of our larger, actually, with hard fence pastures are about 100 acres or a little bit more than 100 acres, but we're grazing anywhere less than 5 acres right now. So really small pastures, and pushing, looking at some of the accuracy, and then like this picture shows, highly accurate of where that fence line, a virtual fence line is. Right now, I think we've got roughly 80 colors on, maybe 79 colors, which we're hopefully this fall, we'll be putting on another, I don't know, 45, 50 colors on another group of cows that we'll be training.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great question here from Tony to both of us, Travis, and it's probably one I can take. Is it possible to come and see your system in action in the US? Yep, absolutely. We love showing it to people. At the moment, we've got ranches live in 5 different states, and that'll be probably about 8 or 9 by the end of this year. As we do that, we'll definitely look to host some open days. We love seeing people in person. It is great to see it, as Travis mentioned. Seeing it in New Zealand was great. So we'll definitely be looking to do that. There's a really good question here for you, Travis, mate. What do you see as the biggest obstacle Halter will face entering the US beef market?
We do have some issues of, we've always done it this way. And so adoption rates of some of our best technologies we have, adoption rates are sometimes low. 20% of the cows in the United States get AI'd. Less than 20% of the calves get implanted. And so some highly effective, cost-effective strategies sometimes don't get adopted at a high rate. And so that can be an issue. Connectivity can be an issue. Think about, cell phone coverage across the United States have kept a lot of technologies from being adopted. And so that can be a challenge for a lot of producers is where they're located and if you could actually get cell phone coverage or how some towers work versus satellite, etc. So that's going to be some of the biggest obstacles from a technology standpoint of adoption is just, we've always done it this way. We don't want technology to, just from a landscape connectivity issue of making it work.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree. And from what we've seen over here so far, I think I'd agree with some of those. I only ask to people who says they don't like the idea of it as long as you just tell us roughly why, because it's really helpful for our learnings. And it's good. We want to learn that stuff. There's quite a host of questions here around like the networking and what that system looks like. So I might just answer that briefly, and that should answer a bunch of it for you. So um, New Zealand, Australia has very little cell service. The US is the same, so we don't rely on cell service. What we do is we put these solar powered base stations around a property that puts out a LoRa network, which is like a radio network. All the data is uploaded off onto that network and bounced back to one tower. So as long as one tower on your property has mobile coverage, or we just put satellite Wi-Fi in, your data is constantly uploaded that way. The towers all mesh together. So we can get really efficient with towers, and as long as one tower can see another one, that's all we need. And that data is pulled off the collar roughly every sort of 3 to 8 minutes. So, for example, if Travis was to pull out his phone right now and extend a break that his cows were in, it would take roughly 3 to 8 minutes for that command to get from his phone to the collars and for that break to be implemented. Um, so hopefully that answers a bunch of your ones about the networking. There's one here around, can you single out individual animals? No, you can't. We shift them as a group. We really rely, a big part of that whole philosophy relies on herd instinct, and moving them together, and we don't want to fight that natural instinct. There's a question here around, do you have a video to show us on cow behavior as they approach the virtual fence? There's a lot of videos on our website about that show it really clearly, but I'm keen, Travis, look, you've been around cattle your whole life. What do they look like to you when they're coming up to the virtual fence?
So I think I'd step back. Several years ago, I saw another company give a presentation on virtual fence, and it's been about 4 or 5 years ago. And what they showed in their presentation was these heifers hitting actually shock line, these cows jumping back. And it was not impressive as they thought it was because of this idea that it's going to keep them in because of the shock. But it's going to change some behavior aspects around the shock. Our cows from a behavior standpoint, um, you don't see them changing. And so they'll walk up to that line and stop. And so you can see we've been out in pastures and the calves be grazing out, maybe over 100 yards out in front of them. And those cows will be standing there waiting for us to open up that shift. And they're just standing there, not worried, not stressed. And so from a behavior standpoint, we don't see a negative behavior. I think we have a positive behavior. And that's one thing, and Theo can touch on it when I was in New Zealand talking to him about it is, those dairy producers will tell you that their cows' behavior has gotten better by using virtual fence versus seeing them as a predator or whatever coming out and getting them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Sort of that whole psychology of cows once they've got halter on. The most interesting one for me is, when you, and I'm not sure if you've seen this yet, Travis, but when you walk past or walk into a pasture of halter cattle, typically, that'll be like, oh, we're getting fed, and that they come to the edge of the fence and they're all going to start bellowing at you to stop eating. But halter cattle, because they associate the collars with fresh grass, they actually tend to just ignore you. And I think it makes it really easy to continually invest that time to be assessing your pasture, what's going on, to make that informed decision about when you're going to shift your cattle. You've got to make sure you still understand what's going on the ranch. Um, Travis, there's a question here and it's probably got quite a tricky one to answer. But it says, do you know what your ROI is on the investment with Halter? I imagine you're going to get this a lot.
Yeah, so not yet. And so since we've only had it for since May, well, we don't know what that is yet. And so that's something we will be looking into. I can tell you right now that we've probably increased our grazing days by 3 weeks. And anecdotally, it looks like our calves are actually bigger. And so we'll see here at weaning, but I think we've seen some positives, and that goes back to those calves actually graze out front, and they're actually grazing a higher quality forage first. They're being able to select for higher quality forage. And I believe, Theo, you guys got some data on that as well.
Yeah,
From
that's a really good point. Actually, there's three questions come through just now asking to elaborate on that. Essentially, we don't collar young calves. We've actually seen this as a really big advantage because the calves are able to creep graze ahead of mum,
Yeah.
And access that better feed. And obviously, the big thing we're trying to achieve there is that lift in weaning weights. Typically, we collar young stock at about 12 months, so that we are working on actually shifting this more closer to sort of 7-8 months, as that work goes through. There's a question here around adjustability of collars on young stock. You absolutely have to adjust them, as they get older.
Mhm.
I'm going to say it's pretty easy. It's you've still got to have them in the yards, and we typically, depending on the time of year, we'd adjust them every sort of 6 to 10 weeks in our systems. Um, I'm going to answer a few questions in a minute around terrain and extensiveness because there's about 17 questions on that. So I will answer that. There's quite a few questions here, Travis, around retention of collars, battery, any issues with solar. Um, what does that look like for you?
So retention, we haven't had any problems. Um, so that they even in because we've got some fairly wooded areas that we're grazing, and so we really haven't had any issues of collars getting caught, pulled off. And so I think we had one that had come off, but that's it the entire time. In terms of batteries, we haven't had any issues yet on the solar side, and that's one question I know Theo can talk on is, come September, October here on the western side of Oregon, is we don't get a lot of sunlight for several months, and so that's something we're really interested in that we'll be working with Halter of looking at how long these batteries will last and how effective they are in the circumstances that we go. For us, it'll be months without sunlight, and see how effective they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to answer that one, I guess we fortunately 95% of the US gets a lot more sun than New Zealand, so we're not too worried. There are a couple of areas, coastal Oregon, coastal Washington, just go through this period through winter with a lot of fog where it's a bit of an unknown for us. So yeah, we couldn't look at a ranch in coastal Oregon or Washington and say, yep, you're going to be perfect through winter just because we haven't experienced it yet. So a little bit of an unknown there. Canada's in a similar bucket. Just, a bit of an unknown there, but we're excited to work through that this winter. And there's a lot of really clever things we can do in terms of battery. To answer the question about extensiveness versus intensive, um, we've got a big range of both. Across the US, Australia, and New Zealand. We've got ranches who are a couple of hundred acres to tens of thousands, from 80 cattle up to 3, 4, 5,000. So a big range. It's really been designed to work across both facets. However, we're really proud of the fact that even in an extensive system, you have the ability to be really precise. When and if required. And that flexible sort of grazing management at all times is what we really hope to unlock. I'm just going down to a few more questions here. Can you run multiple herds off one network system? How many groups are you running all your cows together in one group, Travis? Or have
No,
you split them up?
right now we have two groups,
Nice.
and so we'll have four this fall.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that probably answers it really well. You can run multiple groups, whether you want to split out different age classes, dot types, whatever you like. you can do that option. If you have multiple properties, if you have some BLM or lease ground, you can just toggle between the properties on your app as well. So there's no restrictions there. The range of each base station is a great question. It's a wider question than this, but it really varies on the terrain, how many mountains and hills you have, trees. So we kind of have to assess each ranch on a case by case basis. I'm conscious on time. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to answer one more question, and then we'll finish up with a few things. And I need to we'll finish off with a couple of bits. Are there any infrastructure requirements beside the collar? Towers and collars. You got both of those, and you're good to go. It's been a very good session. Sorry to all the questions I haven't been able to answer. There were a lot, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time to send those in. I've left my details up on screen. We would love to hear from anyone, your thoughts on this, feedback, ideas you have for us. We're very much learning and would like to take in all of that. And Travis, mate, thank you very much for taking your evening to jump on this call. We're very excited to keep working with you and see where this journey takes us. And thank you for giving us such honest, good answers to all these questions. That wraps us up really nicely. Travis, anything final from you, mate?
No, thanks for having me. And if any of these questions, I would glad you can email me. We can talk about on the phone or whatever my experiences with Halter and anything that wasn't discussed that you want to find out, or if you want to come out, we'd be glad to have you.
It's a very kind offer, and to anyone that needs Travis's contact information, I would gladly pass that on. And I see we've just put it in the chat. Thank you all for joining. We really appreciate it. We'll look forward to speaking to you all in the future. And have a great rest of the week.
All right. Well, thanks, Theo.
Thank you, Travis. We'll speak to you soon.
All right. See ya.